Hello everyone, welcome back to the online community. I'm excited for our talk today, which is coming out of some of the recent conversations I've been having with you, particularly people in one-on-one conversations, people emailing me about this topic. So I wanted to address it, which is, here we are in the midst of whatever week this is for quarantine, and, there are people from all over the world, and we're all going through our own individual struggles, and collectively we're going through a struggle as well. The question has emerged, what do we do to nourish ourselves in the midst of this time? How do we feed a sense of love and open-heartedness in the midst of a time that has increasing fear and panic and anxiety? So the person who I often turn to around these topics is Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Zen master and Nobel Peace Prize recipient. He once said, if we know how to feed our love every day, it will stay for a long time. And I think that's sort of the short answer. Thank you for tuning in. No, I'm joking. The idea here is that we need to learn how to nourish ourselves, how to feed our love every single day in little ways. And the thing about it, it's sort of like a phone battery. We just gradually start to deplete and deplete. If we don't even notice how many tabs are running in the background, we don't even know how much they're draining the battery. Actually, I didn't know that was a thing until maybe last year or something like that. Someone said, you close those things out, the battery lasts longer. I go, I had no idea. But what a great metaphor for life, that the more tabs we have open, the more we've got sort of affecting the mind, the less energy we actually feel in terms of coming into the present moment and just appreciating some very simple things. Right now, the sky is very blue today. And we can just relax and say, oh, the sky is blue, and that's nice. That can feel nourishing. But one way that we need to, in terms of closing out those tabs, one thing that we need to do is sort of look at these 4 ways that we consume things. And I'll say more, I'll go through all 4 here, but in order to nourish our love, we need to be conscious about what we consume, what we actually take into our mind and our heart, what actually those tabs are that keep draining the battery. So the 4 kinds of food we can say we consume every day. This is how Thich Nhat Hanh refers to it. He calls it 4 kinds of food, even though it transcends actual physical food. But the nourishment, I could say, the 4 kinds of nourishment that we consume, one would be actual edible food. And the advice from Thich Nhat Hanh here is that we would eat nutritious food that feels nourishing to us, that actually uplifts us, that doesn't drain us. And don't get me wrong, I love cookies. If I could eat cookies every day for breakfast, I would, but I also know that's not going to give me energy. Better for me to have some eggs, right? Better for me to have something maybe organic, something that will give me energy. So food that shows respect for our bodies, but also respect for the earth. Thich Nhat Hanh's fond of saying, if we don't actually treat our bodies with respect, then how can we respect other people? So there's something really, people might get down about, self-care in the midst of a pandemic. But what we're saying here is there's something really valid about us nourishing ourselves physically so that we can remain rooted, we can remain in these bodies, we can feel comfortable in the body, and that allows us to show up more fully for the people around us, the people who might be encountering fear and not have as many ways to actually nourish themselves. So this is the first of the 4 kinds of offering a sense of nourishment and nourishing our love, that we would take care of the body through eating good food, whatever that means to you. The second of them would be what he calls sensory food. This is what we consume with our eyes, with our ears, with our nose, etc. For me, it's interesting, even just having a candle burning in the room, having a nice smell, is nourishing for me. When I raise my gaze and I look out the window and I see the blue sky, that's nourishing. I'm consuming with my eyes, right? When I slow down and I just rest my sense of hearing on the snoring of the dog or the purring of the kitten, that's nourishing. we often do things that pop up those tabs in the background of our phone. And by that, and they might actually be physical tabs. It might be an article that we're supposed to read. We're totally going to get around to, a newspaper article that's going to be really draining for us. It could be a magazine. It could be a Netflix show. It could be internet ephemera. Whatever we consume, we have to realize it affects our mind. I have a friend who's a meditation teacher who just at some point said, sorry, I'm not going to watch anything scary. Like when I go for entertainment at the end of the day and I put on a Netflix or whatever, I'm not going to watch anything that's not going to feed my mind in a positive direction. I remember for a while when the first season came out, I was watching Handmaid's Tale. And I was turning to a friend and I said, it's so weird. I'm having these like horrible nightmares every night. She goes, you're watching a show where a woman gets raped every single episode. Of course you're going to have nightmares. And it's not that we shouldn't watch something, like art and things that feel uplifting, but we have to realize that when we watch violence, when we take in violence, things like that, it affects the mind. It's not like we could just sort of turn it off and say, oh, that's fiction. It affects the mind. And of course, when I talk about like articles and things like that, I'm a big proponent that we stay informed, but as we've talked about in previous sessions together, it might be good for us to have boundaries around how we consume. So for example, great that we read the news every day. For me, that means I'll set aside the half hour in the morning and I'll go through this aggregate I get while I sip my morning coffee, and that's the news I get in the day. Other people might send me things throughout the day. I might glance, but I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole because I've spent the time being informed. At the end of the day, these days I'll often look at some sort of report around the pandemic, particularly around my neighborhood, and so I understand how it's affecting my community. And that's it. But again, it's a short sort of, okay, this is an intentional thing, as opposed to something running through the back of my mind, constantly picking up my phone, looking at it, and consuming things that are draining the battery, that are actually not helping me or uplifting me. So I realize I'm talking a lot about giving my own examples, but I think these are very prevalent things for us, that when we spend hours looking at bad news, that affects the mind. We feel negative. If we only read bad news, we're going to have a very big negative attitude. John Krasinski, who is an actor on the show The Office, he recently launched something called the Good News Network in the midst of this pandemic. I thought that was so brilliant of him, and I've only watched the first episode. I need to catch up, but there was something like, it took me all 5 minutes before I started having tears in my eyes of like all the wonderful things that are happening right under our nose that we don't often think about or talk about or don't make the front page of the New York Times. So it's helpful for us to even take in positive news right alongside some of the ways that we stay informed about the illness and suffering around us. So that could be one way to sort of consume nourishing, sensory food, as I would say. Another way to consume in sort of through the sense perceptions is exactly what I was saying before, that we could take gaps to appreciate the beauty around us, the blue sky, the tulips in the vase, the songs of the birds. Really just saying, once an hour or so, committing to just closing the laptop or turning away from the Zoom call and putting it on mute and just taking 30 seconds to appreciate this present moment. What can I enjoy? Here, there's this piece of art. I don't love this piece of art. It's something that my wife has always had, but I can appreciate it's actually beautifully framed. And that's every time I look up, I was like, that's a really beautiful frame. It can be that simple. We just sort of need to take the time to notice what's right under our nose. And these moments, these little glimpses, these little gaps, will probably nourish us more time than any time on Facebook ever could. So the teaching around this is that if we consume toxic material, it's going to feed our craving, it's going to feed our anger, it's going to feed our fear. So we may not be able to prevent that always. We may not, when a freaked out relative sends us something saying, you got to read this, and sort of triggers something in us. We might have that happen, but then we need to balance it. If we can't always establish really good boundaries around some of the not so wonderful things, some of the things that we might consider toxic, then we need to balance it with other time where we are cultivating really, consuming really positive and wonderful things. Thich Nhat Hanh has advised that we would even set aside time each day to be in a peaceful environment. Whatever that means for you. Maybe it means a walk in nature. Just letting that beauty penetrate us and let our love and joy feel nourished. So I think this is an interesting question. What can you take in through the sense perceptions that can feel nourishing for you? And what do you take in that maybe is draining that you might want to cut out? So we did sort of food we eat, sensory food. And then the next one is volition. She talks about as nourishing our deepest desire. It's a little bit self-helpy, sounds like, right? But what we're talking about, nourishing our deepest desire, is our hope, our aspiration for how we want to live our life. That we don't give up on that because, so many other things are on hold right now. We say, every economy is on hold and we can't go outside and things like that. So I've got to give up my way of being, the aspirations I have for my life. I don't think that we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. It's the idea. He says that you want to sort of be someone, not in an egoic, I want to be the top of my field. I mean, that's perfectly nice aspiration, I suppose, but it's not about I'm going to puff up my ego. But we want to be conscious of who we are. We want to be conscious of the type of person we are. I want to be a kind person. I want to be a loving person. I want to be a generous person. So that we actually start to look at the volition, the sort of general trajectory of our life that comes out of who we want to be, not what we want to do. The idea of I want to do something. Often a sense of success. When we talk about success in the West, it's a word that denotes that someone's sort of financially well off, or someone's juked the system, that they don't have to work much at all, or they only get to do pleasurable work. But if we ask some of the people that we thought had that sort of life, the people who we admire, do you think that you're a successful person? We might be surprised by their response. They might, like many Hollywood stars, or maybe well-paid thought leaders, politicians, they're plagued by the same self-doubt, the same anxiety, same worry that so many of us are. They might have more money, or they might have more flexible work hours, but they still don't consider themselves successful in the way that we might envision. Because there's still something more. There's always going to be something more that we want, that we can do, as opposed to saying, well, who do I want to be? Who do I want to be? So what is success here? My personal opinion, success is one's work, one's sort of general doing, the activity of one's life revolves more around helping people and not causing harm to the best of our ability. So if we come to work, for example, since that's often an area that we say that I want to be successful at work, we come to work with that view that we can help other beings. And we aim to do that to the best of our ability. Whether we check out people's groceries for a living, which is a really important thing to be doing at this time, or we're a brilliant artist, or we work in hedge funds, or whatever we're doing, we're still doing good work because we have the attitude of, I'm trying to help. I'm trying to help people. I'm trying to uplift others. Instead of defining success as something that we need to get, that we need to acquire from external factors, what we're doing here is we're redefining it. Not, I get when I have that much money, or that much power, or that much influence, or that much fame. But a sense of having a sense of healthiness and delight, stemming from the knowledge that we are actually helping the world around us. So that's one way that we could define success, through helping others. It could be, I want to be a kind person, or I want to be a loving person. And that means that we show up for our work, or our family, or school, or any number of things with that quality, that attitude of, here's who I want to be. How do we nourish that every day? Part of it is letting go of our own anxious storylines long enough to actually show up for our life, for the people around us, all of it, a sense of modicum and a modicum of respect and appreciation for our human experience, just what's going on right now. This is a sense of coming into our own sense of wholeness, completeness. We might even say basic goodness. This idea that we're whole, complete, good, kind, enough as is. When we get out of our own way and let go of the stories, we start to relax into the present moment and discover underneath all of the surface of those thoughts that keep us locked in not now, that when we come into now, there's something very potent here. There's something very wholesome. There's something very good. Thich Nhat Hanh said on this topic, if you're motivated by compassion and love, your volition will give you the energy and direction to grow and become even more loving and compassionate. So with all these things, you start seeing whatever seeds we water with our attentions are going to grow. In terms of if we only eat junk food, that's going to not be great for the body and then the mind. If we eat nutritious food, that will help nurture us and give us energy, help the mind. When it comes to the sensory food, whatever we take in and we place our attention on the blue sky and the tulips in the vase, that's uplifting. If we place our attention only on violence, television, the deep, whatever the current political drama may be, and it breeds negativity in us, then that's not going to help us. So we sort of have to be balanced in these things. Whatever we place our attention on grows. And when it comes to this, it's if we place our attention on who we want to be and a sense of volition of, I want to be loving and compassionate, then that directs our life in that general trajectory. We move in that trajectory of being more loving and compassionate. If we say, I'm just going to chase after every stressful thought that occurs, we're going to live a stressed out and anxious life. It's just the nature of the beast. So where do we want to put our mental energy? Can we turn our attention a little bit every day to a positive intention, to positive motivation for who we want to be, as opposed to getting swept up by the current of what's happening around us? Even doing short intentions practices, like the getting up in the morning practice that's in our guided recordings folder, where we just ask ourselves, what qualities do I want to cultivate today? That can be enough. That 5 or so minutes of, what quality do I want to cultivate today? I want today to be a generous day. I want to show up as a generous person. That's how we feed the sense of volition, the sense of motivation. And we move in the trajectory then, the rest of the day, to the best of our ability, being that generous person. So we're naturally committing to ourselves here. We're vowing to develop a sense of understanding, a sense of compassion in ourselves, so that we can become an instrument of peace and love to help not just ourselves, but the people around us and society and the world as well. And then the fourth of these is, after volition comes consciousness, that we'd feed our consciousness. This is where I feel like for foods is maybe not the best way that he put it, but this is the translation we've been given. Consciousness is a sense of he says, our individual consciousness is influenced by the collective consciousness of our environment. It's really interesting. I'll say that again. So our individual consciousness is influenced by the collective consciousness of our environment. Isn't that interesting? It's just worth sort of contemplating. We do not exist in a bubble. We think we do. You think, I've got my home life, and at this point I don't really see many people and all of that. But we are constantly being influenced by a collective consciousness, because we are constantly clued in through the internet, through television, through all sorts of things, people calling us, that we are always taking in something to our consciousness from others. And it's hard not to be freaked out right now if the news is constantly panicked and our family's calling us with whatever the latest anxiety-producing stories are that fill their heads. It's all very easy to absorb. So we're, not surprisingly, for many of us, immersed in fear and anxiety right now, because that's what's going on around us. We are not immune just because we happen to be inside. It's penetrated our four walls and our windows somehow. So if we naturally absorb and reflect what's around us, we might find that we have sort of a low-level hum of anxiety in the body. I'm seeing that with many people, that there's some sense of like low-level, like, ooh, there's nothing specific I'm anxious about, but I'm anxious. And that's very, very common. If we live in a community where there's a culture of understanding, of being compassionate, then we naturally absorb and emulate those qualities. That's just the nature of the beast. So we may not have complete control of this in the same way that we might be able to be more boundaried around what news we take in and what television programs we watch, but can we think about who we surround ourselves with? Can we think of who we spend time with and how they either nurture or drain the battery? And it could be the result of a contemplation like this might be, well, I'm actually a little bit more boundaried around this sort of family member because they keep vomiting anxiety on me. Recently, I turned to a family member and I said, I love you, and I'm not actually able to take on your anxiety in this way. I'm happy to talk to you by phone at some point. But it wasn't pandemic-related anxiety. It was just sort of about other things. And it was, very clear that it was just sort of like that low-level hum of anxiety for that person was vomiting out into speech, into activity. And I said, I'm not going to take it on. I'm not going to magnify it. I'm not going to continue to build it up with you and add more fuel to the fire. I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to be considerate about how we talk about these things. We'll see how it goes. I would love to be like, and they understood it. Now they have no anxiety. But it was more of like, ooh, I don't like that necessarily. But, now we have different sort of conversations. And it actually feels better, at least to me. I think to them as well. So it's a situation where we sort of have to be not only boundaried in like how we absorb from family, friends, like the neighborhood, just the news of the neighborhood. Our dog park is still open. People will talk, sort of gossipy and anxious about things in the dog park, and I can sort of say, I'm gonna step away for a bit, or I can change the direction of the conversation. But then we sort of are more conscious about the environmental consciousness, we could say, the sort of communities that we take part in the ways that they either feed fear and anxiety and panic, or the way that they feel nurturing to us. So the flip side of sort of like cutting out some of those things is also saying, who uplifts me? When I get on the phone with them for a half hour, who feels really uplifting to me? Who, like, I get off and I say, that was invigorating. I feel inspired, or I feel like I want to go do something that is positive for me, like read a book, Who are those people? And can we spend more time consciously turning our attention to them and less time just sort of passively absorbing some of the panic and fear and low-level anxiety that's around us? So these are the four. There's our actual food, our sort of stimuli, the things we take in through the senses. There's our motivation or volition, and then there's the sort of environmental consciousness, or we could even say community here. The communities that we take part in that affect our mental well-being. The more we actually examine these four, the more we're going to live a life that feels grounded, that feels loving, that feels like, oh, this is in line with what I want to be, as opposed to how society is trying to mold me. As with all of the Buddhist teachings, we have a situation where we are being asked to do something other than what society presents. And it goes back to that old story of the Buddha, having attained enlightenment, gets up from under the Bodhi tree and he leans over it, throws the bowl, his one object. He's like, I'm going to renounce my worldly possession. I only got this thing, but here you go. And he throws it in the stream. And in that moment, the bowl actually goes against the stream. It doesn't go downstream like a normal bowl. And it was, somewhat miraculous, you could say. But I imagine the Buddha looking at that and going, I think everything I do from now on is going to go against the stream of society. That was the symbolism that he read into it. Everything from now on is going to go against the stream of society. What we're doing here, what we're saying in terms of like not just binging on junk food or whatever it is, not just watching like television that's gonna like ramp up and distract us because we have like active violence in our minds. Not like giving into a motivation of like being fearful, and not being anxious all the time. And of course, even just sort of cutting through and away from some of the toxic influences in terms of people that are affecting us, and just sort of the environmental low level hum of panic. These are all against the grain of society, because everyone else is sort of like, yeah, this is you go on Instagram and you say, oh, this is the time that I'm gonna just eat ice cream on the couch and watch whatever I want to watch, and blah blah blah. Like, it's just, there's some sense of forgive me, but not giving up on our life. Not saying, oh, this is a time of panic and fear. I might as well just sort of give in to the natural inclination that's going on in the society around me. But to actually go against the stream, to actually turn our attention towards the things that will nourish us, the things that allow us to become, some would say, our best version of ourselves, but we could also just say more us, more of who we actually are. Who we actually are is generous, is kind, is loving, all of these things. So we can turn our attention towards these positive things, nurturing the body with nutritious food, moving it in ways that feel meaningful, enjoying the simple appreciation of the world around us, even if it's just in our own home. Turning our attention to who we want to be, how we want to manifest in the world. And working with people, connecting to people who will help us in that endeavor. Doesn't that sound a little bit better? So good luck with these things, and I look forward very much to us having more conversations about how all of this is landing very soon. Take care.